Horror movies are a fantastic genre for anyone wanting to spin the wheel on finishing the movie and being left traumatized or completely disappointed. Be it with your friends or alone, it always amounts to a great time as long as the right mood is present. And as time passes by, your list of watched horror movies expands, with a split on what is a quality horror movie and what fails to make the cut. Predictable jump scares, bad story, maybe you're just not a zombie fan. But there is a sort of line that a movie has between being considered good or bad. So now that puts up the question, what truly makes a horror movie good? I've asked myself this over and over when going through a bunch of horror movies I absolutely despise while others love them to their core, such as The Descent or Babadook. Same goes the other way around. I found myself drooling over movies like The Autopsy of Jane Doe or Creep, with others not sharing the same opinion. For that exact reason, our first step in deciding what a good movie is will be setting some ground. First, we're assuming the viewer is an adult, or like around the age of 18, let's say. Because kids will shit themselves when boo is in the subtitles, and old people just won't react or will die on the spot like a roach on the sidewalk in the sun. Second, there are horror movies with different horror aspects, as you can't really compare 28 Days Later with Get Out. Both are great movies, but aim towards different audiences, with their horror element delivery being on completely opposite ends. Due to that, by my definition, a good horror movie is good as a movie and horror movie alike, meaning it has to be well done in aspects like the story, characters, how well the horror part is delivered, and so on. But all according to the right audience. For example, a good zombie horror movie should have good zombies to dumb it down. Third, if a horror movie is considered good by this video's criteria, it doesn't mean everyone has to like it. Opinions and tastes still matter, and not every movie is for everyone. All we're doing is trying to create a framework. So, how about we get into it? Also, just one more thing, I'll be using a bunch of horror movies for examples, and they will be named once used. But possible spoilers ahead, so if you hear a movie named you don't want spoiled, just skip ahead or something. I'll be splitting my criteria into 3 different sections: story creation, movie making, and horror factor. First comes story creation. Now, when the story is being built, what makes it a good story in my opinion is that the viewer is pulled in by it. I know, obvious. A viewer can be pulled in through many different ways, a large one being the characters. If the movie creates a good character, it can attract a lot of attention, such as Art the Clown from Terrifier. The first Terrifier movie worked on a very small budget, but because they created such an iconic face of the movie who also appealed to the gore fan due to how the movie is, it was a success. Another great example would be Nicolas Cage in Willy's Wonderland. As a horror movie, it is straight ass, but god was it fun to watch. Nicolas Cage not saying a single line, meaning complete silence from him, chugging soda, playing a pinball machine, and throwing hands with animatronics is ridiculously fun. Now, it doesn't even have a good story, but Nicolas Cage's character is absolutely loved, and the movie is fun as hell, so while it might not be quality horror, it still makes for a great watch. Speaking of that movie, the rest of the characters in it are mostly kind of annoying, which is another factor movies like to incorporate, which is creating hated personalities. Mostly aiming towards someone despised by the audience, that someone later being met with a grim end which the viewers enjoy. In Willy's Wonderland, Bob and Kathy are a couple that decide to make some dumb decisions, basically having sex in a building full of murderous animatronics, and I bet you can't guess what happens.
Bobby, that thing just moved.
Where the fuck did it go?
There is a decent amount of satisfaction when a hated character is gone, but when they aren't punished quick enough or at all, it can lead to an unpleasant watching experience. That being a reason I wasn't a fan of the Paranormal Activity, and besides its awful story, whatever that may be, and the jump scares, the main character pisses me off the most. Micah in the Paranormal Activity is just an asshole throughout the majority while his kind girlfriend suffers and being haunted, and it takes about the entire movie to see Micah catapulted into the camera he loves more than his girlfriend. So when creating a character, it is extremely vital that it fits the viewer's enjoyment either through comfort or pleasure of seeing the character's demise. But characters aren't the only important thing when it comes to horror movies, as plot matters too. There must have been a time when you were searching for a movie and you look at the description thinking, this seems interesting. Creating an interesting story can be very vast and not something we can pinpoint as in what is good and what isn't. It mostly depends on the person that's watching. And of course, as long as the story isn't something like, man goes into forest and there awaits a creature feature featuring the creature. On the other hand, the plot can be structured in a correct way, and that mainly comes from the character's choices, progression, and conflicts. Any horror movie that is full of characters making dumb decisions or escalating the situation for no reason loses a lot of points on the plot. I think we've all watched a movie that has had us internally screaming, why would they do that? Not pointing any fingers, but let's take Creep in this situation. While the movie in my opinion is really good, the main character Aaron puts way too much trust in the antagonist, who ends up using that trust against him, putting an axe in the back of Aaron's skull. On the opposite end, The Thing is a great movie not only because of its setting and uniqueness, but because the characters make good decisions. They react like any individual would if an alien was out to kill the entire camp. But that's just a partial amount of the plot's essence. The character's progression is also important, showing how the story and all horror elements affect a character throughout the movie. In most horror movies, the character learns, adapts, and at times even overcomes the challenge they're confronted with, an example being Evil Dead Rise. From a normal family, opening the Necronomicon has some members of the family possessed by demons, which the survivors adapt to fight and survive against, coming out as completely different individuals. Towards the end, in order to survive or attempt to beat the main conflict, the protagonist must show what all they've given up and how it's affected them. And sometimes they don't even end up winning, which makes horror such a fun genre. Yes, there are moments when the good side prevails. But in movies such as Sinister, Ellison is checking out tapes he found in a house the family just moved in, revealing tragic recordings showing families being murdered. Ellison's family life and his own are broken apart when he looks to research and unfold the mystery of these tapes, and in the end his own family ends up on a snuff recording, with his child recording that tape and consumed by the deity that perpetrated all the events. Now, while characters and plot are the foundation, atmosphere is what gives the story its soul. It's about the emotional narrative and set tone within the story. Whether it's the religious dread in the incantation or psychological naked grandpas in Hereditary, the story's atmosphere sets a mood and grips the audience emotionally or psychologically. This is created through world building, pacing, dialogue, and themes. A story set in a Romanian monastery in 1952 about an unseen evil force feels completely different than a huge shark attacking people. Atmosphere in story terms means knowing what kind of fear you're going for, be it dread, disgust, shock, or existential horror. But that emotional layer must be slowly engraved into the story, not just switched left, right, and center whenever it feels like. The story's atmosphere is important because it's the reason you know something is wrong, even if you can't put your finger on it at first. The one movie that falls into my mind, which switched its atmosphere, is The Nun. It went from a quiet atmosphere with the viewer left thinking for themselves to a loud CGI-filled mess with battles between the holy and unholy in an instant. The atmosphere can be changed, but not out of nowhere and on its head. Give it a good build-up and let it seep into the watching experience. We've covered the story creation, but in order for that story to be captured as best as it can be, the movie making must follow some rules as well. Most, if not all, movies are built of a beginning, core, and ending. But how these three are paced is what makes the difference between watching paint dry and being actually interested. The beginning should be reserved for setting in a seed of unease, and that can be done by showing the threat or not. In most movies, it's created by showing the conflict, although not revealing what it is. In the movie Talk to Me, during a party, this dude Cole finds his brother Duckett locked in a room, acting like a completely different person. Duckett doesn't recognize his brother, and he's talking absolute nonsense while Cole is trying to help him get back home, spotting something's wrong. While helping him, Cole is stabbed by his brother, who then also shoots himself in the foot, or rather stabs himself in the eye. From the beginning, it's shown that Duckett seemed possessed or was under an extreme influence, which, with the set tone of them being at a party and what later unfolds, fits the beginning very well. But at the same time, it makes us curious. Why did that happen? What was the cause? And by watching the movie, we figure it out. And following that intro is the core where all the build-up stands. In the core, the movie's story unravels and shows progression. The deeper into the core we get, the clearer the threat becomes, there's a larger struggle, more risk, and it creates a foundation. The foundation is all about character and plot building, which I mentioned earlier, but most importantly, it escalates to the ending so that once it's reached, we are ready for it. Speaking of which, the ending is what everything has led up to and what quite some movies fail at. The viewer has attached emotions to our characters, seen their development, and followed through the plot, which now has to end. At this point, there are many ways movies go about it. Either the protagonist wins after a long struggle, like in The Conjuring, or they lose, like in Hell House. How the movie ends is completely up to the story. It's about the connection the ending has with everything before it that matters. It should be an earned and meaningful ending that was built up until this point and connects well with the beginning and core. A movie that doesn't do this well would be The Watchers, which is built up by a tone of these skinwalker-like entities that can't walk on the sun and are also trapped inside a forest. Okay, they trap humans in a shelter for entertainment, those humans being our main crew. The main crew builds a bond between each other as they go through struggles together in an attempt to keep themselves alive. Towards the end, some of the main characters end up escaping, and at the end, it's told that these skinwalkers are actually some sort of gods banished into the forest. But one of the skinwalkers has been disguised as a part of the main crew since the beginning and makes it out of the forest. Back home, our main character figured out there was a skinwalker among them, visiting a friend from the main crew to tell her about the skinwalker, who reveals to be the person she's talking to. Then the real friend comes home, who is attacked by the skinwalker that reveals to the protagonist it's like the ugly duck of the pack and how it got bullied by other skinwalkers for being different. Oh, f*** me. But the main character sympathizes with it, telling the fairy skinwalker it's part human because of some research and that's why it was different, having it be able to leave the forest and walk out on the sun. And then this god skinwalker demon fairy deity is fully convinced, grows wings and fucks off. All like the last 15 minutes of the movie. You know what? Enough. Put it on the same tier as Sharknado. There's many examples of good and bad endings, and as I continue rambling on, I say we move on to another aspect I want to talk about, which is the cinematic atmosphere. This is where all the sounds, visuals, color grading and such all come together to create the horror experience. Now, the visual tune is pretty important in a horror movie, like certain scenes have to look and feel well in order to grab the right vibe. And it's another case where it could be bright like in Midsommar or completely opposite like in The Possum, but in general that's up to the movie's mood and atmosphere to decide. The key focus of the cinematic atmosphere in horror movies for me comes in the form of sound. Now, for those that may not agree, have you ever tried watching a horror movie with the elevator music in the background? Truly a nightmarish experience, I know. The sound design within a movie is the leading aspect to create a fitting environment. The music is about as important as in all movies, horror aside. It can tell you if what's happening is action-packed or happy. For the scarier part of it, the music can take a dark turn or at times even stop. This begins a feeling of unease, since once in complete silence, those background sound effects feel louder and scarier than ever. Incorporating creaks, static, or emphasized sound effects with the surrounding, the viewer's brain will begin to prepare for something bad to happen. It can really mess with the nerves and build up to a good jump scare or shocking moment if well executed. A good example of that for me would be Gown Jam, Haunted Asylum. The movie has some decent jump scares and the audio cues are just as good. And while we're already on this topic, I tried my best, okay? While jump scares can be manipulated through different build-ups or switch-ups by audio alone, it's not like the visual doesn't matter. You still have to create a shocking visual that has the viewer jump on the inside, and that can be done through jump scares, sure. But there are other horror factors such as gore and psychological horror that mess with your mind. And that's my final point in today's video, but before we visit it, I just want to make it clear that movies shouldn't rely on that or anything alone. If a movie fully relies on its shock factor and disregards the story creation and movie making, it's a bad movie. The best representation of that would be a more recent-ish release called Tear It. The movie has good horror monster design, which can be helpful in jump scares. But those being extremely predictable, the plot being worse than the Jigsaw movies, and its acting thrown aside, it really does make for a scary thought that you've just been robbed of 92 minutes. Speaking of Jigsaw, that's a well-renowned movie for relying on gore, but I will not be putting it on the bad list because I want to keep my jaw. And our final topic on what makes a horror movie good will be the horror factor itself, of course. Now, we're talking about jump scares, gore, and shock. Something your mind perceives as disturbing is shown in a very out-of-nowhere fashion, which exploits the brain's natural startle response, causing us to get scared. And with the amount of horror movies out there, there will be different horror factors. We'll be splitting those into two: sudden and passive. The sudden factors jump out at us, after being built up through audio and visual cues which need to be done well with the correct pacing. They're a staple of the horror genre in general and commonly used in horror games. I mean, you know, Five Nights at Freddy's, Resident Evil. Those are your usual jump-at-you factors that we too see in horror movies and happen according to the plot. Now, it can be ghosts, a mangled human body indulging in a death game, or it can even be something mentally hitting, so messed up your only thought is, what the fuck? A prime example from me would be the 2022 Speak No Evil. Now, I will not get into the entire movie, but at the end, a child has his tongue cut off by the antagonist couple who force their parents to watch while it happens. Those parents don't do anything to help their child, and throughout the movie, they place way too much trust into this couple. So at the very end, they are taken to a rocky wasteland, stripped naked and stoned to death, with other rock piles besides them indicating they weren't the first this happened to. It is such a disturbing sight as all of this unfolds that in the viewer's mind, it's best described as mental gore. It's a hard-hitting type of horror factor, but in any case, these are the three main branches of the sudden horror factors. All of this can be done well with the level of how realistic it looks due to no one really being scared by cheap dolls and gore in this day and age. So that sums up the sudden horror factor. What about the passive? The passive horror factor, on the other hand, would be the imagination. It's a fantastic part of horror movies because it depends on the one watching. Hiding the monster or threat from the audience will passively start the process of the viewer's imagination thinking what that threat actually is. And the thought of not knowing creates an eerie presence within that experience. As an example, let's take a look at the Blair Witch Project. For the majority of the movie, we're left with the characters, their paranoia, and our imagination, which attempts to create all these possibilities of what is actually causing the disturbance. There is given hints and signals that distinguish possibilities within our watching experience as to what is causing the distress. Is it a cult, a demon, or even as the title indicates, a witch? And because of that, in many movies, less can mean more. Showing the monster right off the bat doesn't allow imagination to take its course of creating different monsters for each viewer specifically and fitting to their fears. Rather, if a movie can really exploit the viewer's imagination and use that to build up its fear factor, that's hitting the gold mine. And with that, my final point is complete. Overall, don't take this video as these are the only things horror movies need to do. The creation behind a movie is so much deeper. But from a viewer's perspective, the aspects I mentioned today would be the major elements that separate a good and bad horror movie. And even then, it doesn't cover everything since the horror movie genre is so vast that there are possibly fantastic movies which don't follow all the things I said. Let me know all what you think in the comments as to why you agree or not. I'm open-minded and always willing to learn more. But if you're not interested in talking about my takes today, at least let me know what your favorite or least favorite horror movie is and why. I hope you enjoy the video. If you want more content like this, please support me by subscribing, sharing, commenting, and liking. But to not waste any more of your time, I hope you have a great, and I mean great, rest of your day.